And Ryan, if you'd like to introduce who's also with you.
So this is Stephanie Bertolo. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Ryan. I am the Vice President Education of the McMaster Students Union, and this is Stephanie, our Associate Vice President of Municipal Affairs. I'm excited and grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today. We are here today representing McMaster students to provide information about the realities and experiences of students who are on the receiving end of this bylaw program. This program was set up to fail. The failure of this program is exacerbated in its expansion. We are here to advise council to take a truly proactive approach, one that balances education with the enforcement to first-time renters, transient student population, and students who are living precariously. This program further worsens our living conditions and leaves students having to sacrifice numerous things to pay fines. This motion also undermines the MSU's continuous efforts, places an increased burden on students, and tarnishes the City of Hamilton's relations with current and prospective students of McMaster.
In theory, council may have believed that the fines from this program would have been paid by landlords. Indeed, the fines do go on their property tax roll. In reality, however, landlords are passing the responsibilities and the fines on to students. As evident from testimony from several students who have paid upwards of $750, not knowing their rights, they often comply. This is not only burdening financially strained students, but it is worsening the problem. This is another reason that this program is flawed. Students do not know their rights as tenants and are ill-informed about necessary and relevant city bylaws. While this program is marketed as proactive, we seemingly have differing definitions of the word. In this program, proactive is seen as residents not having to report bylaw infractions, but to us, proactive would be working towards not acquiring fines in the first place. This requires the program to take a less punitive approach, providing more education to first-time renters. A great example of this is the MSU Student Community Support Network, which the MSU is committed to expanding this year. Through our president, we have clearly communicated this to Councillor Johnson, our desire to expand this program. This is raised in private conversation at Lock Street, again at meetings on campus, and recently at an AWCA meeting. The councillor is well aware of this superior program and development by the student union. He has not explained to council or to the MSU why his program is better than what the student union is already developing.
The approach that is being taken is treating students like a burden on the city. We understand why you might think this, given the public incident on Dalewood Avenue this past weekend. But to address that point before we continue, this bylaw enforcement program has absolutely no relation to annual incidents such as homecoming, and we are working very closely with the university, the surrounding communities, and Hamilton Police to address these issues as we do every year. This motion was brought forward well before homecoming, and mention of homecoming during this debate and questions are truly a derailment from this argument because of its irrelevancy to the matter at hand.
The councillor has not provided any other relevant information to this program that he's looking to expand. He has not provided any substantive information as to the types of tickets given out, the number of repeat offenders, and the times that they are given out. The only information we have received is that this program pays for itself. This program is also compromising student retention efforts and affecting students' perception of Hamilton. I'll point to the example of a viral GoFundMe page, which a student has circulated on social media to fundraise for their $745 grass cutting ticket. What do you think this message has sent to students regarding the city's reputation as a place to live? The fact that this program pays for itself is a reason that it should be discontinued, because it is not changing student behavior. If we were seeing less bylaw infractions as a result, we would consider it successful. It seems like what we are seeing is increased infractions and the need to have more untrained officers patrolling neighborhoods. This has not been a successful program, and council only being expanding a program that has been designed to fail.
Finally, we question the integrity of these tickets. These bylaws are being forced by Mohawk College students who are still learning about the law. How can people who are still learning about the law effectively enforce it? Overall, this cost-cutting mechanism has weakened the integrity of the city's law enforcement. If council does decide to pass this motion, we will understand the message that is being sent, and we are disappointed that this motion was not discussed with the MSU prior to it being submitted, despite a supposedly joint commitment between Councillor Johnson and the MSU. In this matter, we cannot stand for profits being generated off of our students. We will inform students of their legal rights and facilitate them accessing legal aid if these tickets continue to be unfairly allocated to them. However, as council, you know that there are so many possible alternatives, and as always, the McMaster Students' Union is more than willing to work with the city to explore and implement these positive alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a speakers list. Councillor Green.
I'll yield the floor to Councillor Johnson.
Aidan Johnson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And through you, the MSU representatives who have come forward are an example of why we should respect the MSU and why we should have great hope for the future of politics. We've heard a very compelling case brought forward by the MSU about the interests of students. And I'm going to respond with a couple of counter-arguments. And my hope is that as I speak, one of my core convictions will be clear, and that is the conviction that MSU is playing a very positive role in the conversation right now, and that this is an extremely complex topic, one that the MSU leaders are grappling with very ably. So sort of a scattershot approach to the arguments that we've heard. I'm just going to go through and try to address what I've heard today. Overall, what I heard in the delegation is that the program was designed to fail. The program was not designed to fail. The program has been a success in that it is leading to improvements in hygiene in the neighborhood. It is leading to improved enforcement of law in the neighborhood. And I count those as successes. The real problem that we have in the McMaster neighborhoods, Madam Chair, is absentee landlordism. And we need a variety of policy approaches to get at the toxic problem of absentee landlordism. One of those solutions that we as a city have the power to implement is landlord licensing, and we'll be returning to landlord licensing this year in the context of our budget discussions. Improved bylaw enforcement is another tool that the city has in order to address the glaring hygiene problems, health and safety problems that exist in our McMaster neighborhood that bylaw can help us to get at. The students are complaining with justice that landlords are unfairly downloading the costs associated with bylaw enforcement to students. I'm holding my tongue slightly, Madam Chair, in that now is not the time for me to start offering legal counsel to the MSU or to the student community about tenant rights and about landlord obligations. It is the case that I have offered throughout my time as councillor to work with the MSU on a project they refer to in their delegation, which is a project that I think has become even more important in the present moment, the project of legal education for students. And I would like to circle back. This delegation is an opportunity for me to circle back to the MSU and reiterate that offer. It seems clear to me that this motion and incidents over the weekend and the expanding conversation about problems in the McMaster neighborhood require a true effort of legal education within the student community. I am a tenant myself, Madam Chair. My husband and I cannot afford to buy a house in the ward I've been elected to represent. Therefore, we rent. And the topic of tenant rights is one that is near and dear to my heart as a tenant. And it is certainly the case that it would be a privilege to work with the student community in order to educate students about their tenant rights. Landlords have very deep obligations. It is a privilege to own property, and it is a privilege to lease property, to be a landlord. It is particularly a privilege to be a landlord providing housing for students at a very key moment in their lives when they are completing and acquiring education. And it is an even deeper privilege than that to be a landlord providing housing for lower income students. And Madam Chair, I want to make clear that I've understood one of the most important ethical arguments that our student delegation has brought forward today. There are different kinds of student poverty. There's the student poverty of students from higher income households who are currently completing an undergraduate degree and are short on cash and will soon be entering the workforce in jobs that will lift them out of student poverty and into non-poverty. So that's one kind of student poverty. Then there's a more serious kind of student poverty, which is the student poverty of students from low-income families who may well wind up low income after graduation. And we know that many of the students in this category are ESL. We know that many students in this category are students who are the first generation in their family for the entire history of their family line to attend post-secondary education. So needless to say, the conversation we need to have about protecting student tenants from bad landlords and the conversation we need to have about legal education for the student community needs to focus particularly on the most marginalized students, low-income students, and differentiate the different kinds of student poverty. So those are comments I want to throw out. I'm going to look down to my notes just to address a few more comments that I heard in the delegation. I heard a comment that I agreed with from Ms. Bertolo. Proactive enforcement would mean working toward not needing bylaw enforcement program in the first place. I actually totally agree. My hope is that we can reach a point where bylaw enforcement won't be necessary and where the landlord community and the student community and the non-student community each understand their obligations and their rights and work together in harmony. That is the long-term goal. And further to the point, Stephanie said in her delegation that I haven't explained why the motion I'm bringing forward is better than what the MSU is currently doing. It's true, I haven't done that, and the reason I haven't done that is because I don't think the motion I'm bringing forward is better than what the MSU is doing. I think what the MSU is doing is absolutely great. I don't see this as better. I see this as a complementary program. I see this as something that the city can do, and certainly not something that's better than anything MSU is doing. We heard from our delegation that the motion I'm bringing forward is irrelevant to the problems we saw over the weekend associated with homecoming, and that's true. I had this conversation yesterday with local attorney Craig Burley on Twitter, in which I admitted that the motion I'm bringing forward today does not directly address the problems to do with policing and the problems to do with university operations that we saw manifest over the weekend through the homecoming parties on Dalewood, on the Oval, and in other places. However, this motion does get at the broad cultural problem that we see in Westdale and Ainsleywood of bad landlordism. So, to reiterate, I am looking forward to working with the MSU on legal education. I'm looking forward to working with the MSU to continue the conversation that actually began years ago under Councillor McCaddy, but that reached a very interesting moment last night at the monthly meeting of the Ainsleywood-Westdale Community Association. Our MSU leaders, both of our delegates today, in my opinion, bravely came out to enter into conversation with the concerned neighbors and leaders of the Ainsleywood-Westdale Community Association and police and McMaster administration about the next steps to address the very complicated web of problems that is facing the student neighborhood around McMaster. Although I disagree with some of the arguments that have been brought forward, I would like to congratulate these students for being excellent advocates and true leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'm certainly grateful to have both of you here today. Your presentation are points well taken. I will not patronize you nor mince words in my line of questioning. You've heard today that the students have been characterized as presenting a hygiene problem to the community. Would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, so, and we have yet to see the examples of that in how this program has been successful, because what we have been seeing is incidents of grass cutting or incidents of recycling bins maybe being visible on the side of a house rather than towards the back. And these are things that frankly we consider trivial when it comes to the hygiene of a community. We care about community cleanups after parties. We care about making sure our streets are safe and clean. And that for us is what a healthy, clean city looks like. But that's not what we're seeing through the bylaw program. Instead, we are seeing fines offloaded onto students for maintenance, which is, again, the landlord's responsibility. So if students are dirtying the city, as is implied by this motion, nothing about this motion does actually address the issue of landlords if there's no consideration given to the fact that landlords are still offloading costs onto students, because at the end, the students are still paying for it. So in theory, it might work, but in practice, we're not seeing any consideration given to the realities of what students are experiencing.
And through you, Madam Chair, you should know that I didn't support this when it came up the first time. I thought it a unnecessary step in terms of the actual response to the problem. Are you familiar with the 1978 movie Animal House, starring John Belushi? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, a little bit.
Are you aware that it is based on the experiences of McMaster University, I believe the producer? Are you aware that it is tied to McMaster University?
Oh, did not know that.
So why I say that is I find it quite interesting that the generations of past, which may in some cases actually still live in this neighborhood, had a true and real party culture in that community in terms of what they brought in terms of disruption and other things. And if you have time, through you, Madam Chair, I encourage you to watch the movie with that new context in mind. I call up to this memory of when Councillor Farr, Madam Chair, brought forward the Hess Village motion, and the next week this video surfaced of this debauchery that was happening in Hess Village. And the reason why I raised that is because when I knew this was coming, and I heard the reports of homecoming, I was very concerned, Madam Chair, that timing would have weakened your cause. However, I pull up a article from CBC dated October 2nd, 2017, Hamilton deserves better, 2,000 students block Dalewood Avenue for homecoming. Byline, no reports of mischief or injury reported, police say. To your knowledge, were there any arrests and or major causes of injury or mischief as it related to the 2,000 people in the homecoming process?
No, so we actually did talk to the police afterwards, and there was no injury to students. EMS was called once, but it was because somebody cut their lip, and that was the only real situation in which somebody needed medical assistance. And so we're very grateful for the fact that students were safe that day, because that is our major priority.
And I find
and no
that,
arrests, sorry.
I'm sorry? I find that absolutely amazing. 2,000 students in this neighborhood, residents, in a very student-rich housing neighborhood, and we have events like Supercrawl, Festival of Friends, Cactus Festival, with tens of thousands of people requiring paid duty services and all other types of things. So through you, Madam Chair, to the presenters from the MSU, how long has the tradition of homecoming been at McMaster?
Oh, ages, probably. But the way we've seen homecoming evolve and change, it looks different every year. We can't assume what homecoming is going to look like next year because it was completely different than it looked last year. So that's one of the great things about homecoming, is that McMaster students change every year. The spirit is there in terms of pride in our community, but it looks different every year, and the MSU does work every year to make sure that the next year will be as successful as possible.
And through you, Madam Chair, to the presenters from the MSU, how many students, ballpark approximately, live in off-campus accommodations in or around McMaster?
Oh, what is probably at least 20 to 30% of McMaster's whole population.
Which is roughly 40,000, is that correct?
It's about, so we'll have, I would see about 10,000 people of the entire McMaster population living off campus.
I find that fascinating, Madam Chair, because when I hear that, and I'm going to reflect on the comments of the last delegation, it might be the fact that McMaster students make up the largest ratepayers association in the city. And I'm now curious, Madam Chair, through you, and maybe working with the MSU, we could find out what the numbers look like in terms of their economic contribution through property tax assessment. And I bring that point up because it seems like, through me, Madam Chair, to you, to the presenters, would perhaps you consider a proactive measure of planning in future years, where appropriate, on-street parties, on-street accommodations for homecoming to relieve this 2,000, which compared to Supercrawl is 2%, is relatively small. Would you look at proactive measures that might account for next year's homecoming that would be off campus and in the community, working perhaps in partnership with neighborhood associations and or business associations and or high density student housing communities?
Oh, absolutely. We want an environment where the community can also feel like they are part where students feel like they're part of the Ainsley-Wood-Westdale community, but the Ainsley-Wood-Westdale community also feels like they're part of the student community. And so that would be an ideal situation where we get a street closure permit and are able to work, or whether it's at a park or whether it's on campus, whatever it might be, being able to bring people together and enjoy the celebrations that we have, Super Crawl, Art Crawl, and Homecoming.
And so a few more questions along that line, because we're trying to work in partnership with the MSU and certainly be proactive in our approach. You've raised some interesting points around the legitimacy and or the knowledge and experience of underclassmen, or I should say non-graduated Mohawk students, in presenting cases against other students at McMaster. What are your thoughts on that? You'd mentioned legal services. Have you considered any other actions from the MSU's perspective in terms of supporting your students as a union?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting dynamic of the Mohawk students being there, and I spoke to the illegitimacy of that system in itself, where you're not having licensed bylaw officers who have to go through all the training that any other bylaw officer has to go through. And we call into question some of those tickets because of that lack of training. And if some of these tickets are not being given out fairly, we're willing to work with students to fight those tickets, whether that's setting up legal counsel for them, whether that is facilitating them accessing legal aid, or providing them legal aid itself.
So in your opinion, do you feel like this pits students against students?
Well, yes, quite frankly. Although we don't often see the Mohawk students, the very public demonstration is that these are Mohawk students doing this. And we have a great relationship with the Mohawk Student Association, and we would never want to see that be diminished by something like this. So we actively work to make sure it doesn't. But that is a factor that exists.
I'm also curious about the aspect around our own staffing, collective bargaining, union perspectives on using these students in this way and expanding it in this way. But I'll take that up with staff. Lastly, what would you like to see moving forward? Actually, before I ask that question, have you been apprised of any follow-up reports regarding this motion in terms of this need? Because I don't seem to have one in front of me today. Have you heard any statistics? Have you heard any numbers that would substantiate the need, given the fact that 2,000 students in one of the largest homecomings of recent history I've ever heard, no injuries, no mischief? Have you received any reports that would justify, in your mind, this need for additional bylaw officers in this community?
No, all of the information we found out about the program, we had to find out ourselves by actually going student to student for the students who have been very public about the impacts that this program has had on them.
Okay, so from the police, have you heard? Are you apprised of any reporting from your chief of security, Mr. Glenn DeCare, or the Hamilton Police Service around the crime trends in your community as it relates to underage drinking, arrests, violence, burglaries, vandalism, anything from that to public urination? Do you get reports on that in terms of how you're doing?
Well, what we have been experiencing is a number of break-and-enters into the homes around McMaster from non-students, and that is something that's very alarming that we haven't seen action being taken on, and something that we're actually quite worried about. So that's the main criminal offense that's been happening, but it's not the students who are addressing it. And so on our end, we have to make sure students are locking their doors and things like that. But if people are coming and targeting these homes around Ainslie-Wood and Westdale, that's a problem that is not being addressed.
So is it that I'm hearing that as an MSU, your position is that you're feeling that your students are over-policed and underserved?
That would be correct.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to have more questions for staff when the time comes as it relates to some of the questions that have been brought before us here today. Certainly appreciate both of you guys being here before us and the perspectives that you share. And I'm really interested, just while you're up there, to find out what these costs are going to look like in terms of a legal defense fund taking each and every one of these bylaw cases to court. But I'll get that out of staff and we'll get a sense for what the scale is. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I've had myself on the speakers list, so I'm going to relinquish to Councillor Aidan Johnson.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Just as questions, and certainly in support of your concerns of saying that there needs to be more education for the students and for the landlords. That I cannot deny one iota. It's absolutely imperative that information gets out there, both chains, both lines of information. And I want to be very careful, Madam Clerk, that I'm speaking to this, because as a just so I can understand certainly the issues and the concerns that are being raised by the students and certainly by the landowners. So I will give a particular instance, I won't give names, but I have a owner in my ward that has rental housing in Westdale that rents to students. They were charged under the long grass and weeds bylaw, so maintenance of the property, they were charged. The fine was passed along to the landlord, obviously, very irate, very upset, felt it was inappropriate that they were charged. So I had to kind of go through the process, and I said, well, who's responsible to cut the grass? And I'm going to tell you honestly, the tenants are. She said they are explicitly on the lease advised they are to maintain the grass. So this is where there is a disconnect.
Yes.
And I don't know how you fix that. With this particular person, I said, you know what? As a responsible landlord, you should be maintaining the grass. You shouldn't be depending on students who have other interests and issues that they have to deal with right now. So maybe it becomes an issue of how do we make sure that things are followed through proactively, that both sides know their responsibilities. And that's what I get more often than not with rental properties. So I just wanted to put that out there. Is that what you're seeing going on?
Yeah, well, when those clauses are put into leases, like if it's not put into the lease, the default is that it is the landlord's responsibility. That's what we know. If it's put into the lease, okay, the tenant now has assumed that responsibility, whether knowingly or not, is another issue in itself. And we're working on standardized leases as well with the province.
Perfect.
But what we have seen, like, even if that clause is in the lease, but the landlord is not providing a lawnmower to the students, in what capacity can a student go out and buy a lawnmower for a 4-year rental? Like those are not things that we can expect students to do within their financial constraints. And so that's where we expect cooperation with landlords and tenants to avoid these fines in the first place.
Very much appreciated, and I totally agree. And I really like the idea that you're saying, trying to standardize so everybody knows, and that might be that door in to say, we can straighten things out. And I'll be honest, my mother lives in Westdale. She has rental housing all around her, student rental housing, and there's years that they've got great students, absolutely great students. And there's years that she has problems, but she never approaches the students. She will approach the landlord.
Right.
So just so you understand, I mean, you have to remember the other side of property owners that do take pride. My mother's 54, 55 years in Westdale now. Takes great pride in the property and certainly likes to see properties maintained around her as well. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you. And I have Councillor Partridge.
Great.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have one question for Ryan. And I'm sorry, what was your name?
Stephanie.
Stephanie, thanks very much for coming in. But I have quite a few questions for staff, so if you'll come back to me when it's appropriate. So Ryan and Stephanie, there was an article in the paper about the party that happened, which has already been spoken to quite extensively. My question is around non-students. Non-students, not only that were at the party, but also non-students that are living amongst the students in McMaster. Is that happening, and can you speak to what you feel might be the percentage or the amount?
Well, in terms of permanent residents, are you referring to student age non-students who are living around there?
Yeah, I'm referring to students who would be at parties like this or associating with students at McMaster, perhaps going on campus, but they're not actually students. They don't actually attend the university.
Yeah, I think the amount of people who are living in Ainslie-Wood and Westdale who don't actually attend McMaster is quite limited to the people who have lived there for a very long time. And so those are the community members we see who are much older and who have raised their families here and maybe have moved in as a family. So.
Okay, no, and Madam Chair, I asked that question because, certainly my own sons, when they attended university, there would be perhaps 6 living in a house and, ultimately one or two, would not be attending the university, but they were sharing in, kind of living in there, but they participated in contributing to the, the property standards and certainly the partying and that going on. So, it may not be a big issue at McMaster, but I appreciate your answer for that. If you'll come back to me, Madam Chair.
We'll come back and start speakers list for staff questions. I have Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was a student in MAC back in 1991. It might have been 92, a little bit fuzzy. I attended. I was actually in attendance at the very last McMaster University homecoming weekend quad party. They were famous. Every year there were quad parties on campus. In no way dissimilar to obviously what occurred on Dalewood in the past few days. This last party, however, was, I think, in a word to describe it, mayhem. There were fights. There were beer bottle bombs thrown up in the air in a very large, condensed crowd. And MAC 5-0, I can safely say, were totally overwhelmed with the fisticuffs. Fortunately, nobody was seriously hurt that I could see. One person ran off with handcuffs into the trees. They were so overwhelmed that they had to let that person go. I always wondered to this day how they ever got out of those handcuffs. But it was mayhem. I had attended many before, even as a high school student once, because 5440 was playing and they were my favorite band at the time, and they were never like that particular last quad party. The result was McMaster Brass got together and said, that's it, no more quad parties on campus. So my guess is the result soon after was that these types of quad parties now began to happen in the neighborhoods, and not dissimilar to many other schools. MAC didn't want the liability, and you can argue whether or not that's justified. But my question to you, through you, Chair, is in your time or in recent times, has the conversation ever occurred with the powers that be, Sean, our student staffer there, I forget his last name, and the student union or the student body representatives about a return to campus for these homecoming parties? And if so, has it happened, or is there a possibility that may happen, and as a result, quite possibly mitigate some of the on-street parties that are happening, through you, Chair?
Yeah, so that, sorry to age you, but that was a long time ago. And so things have...
It's okay. Councillor Jackson is also here, and that was, I think, the 70s, 80s.
Let's not get into that.
90s, 70s. Okay, there's a few alumni here.
But what that means is that all options really are on the table for us. And the idea of having something on campus is not off the table, absolutely. And the Dean of Students is well positioned to make that call as well. But again, we have not banned things on campus, and we've actually held large-scale campus events. But I do want to just speak to the fact that these things are still not particularly relevant to the motion at hand. And when we are talking about this bylaw enforcement, we don't actually, these annual parties of homecoming or St. Patrick's Day that happen once a year are not addressed by bylaw enforcement about maintenance. That's front of the line law enforcement that we need to see, and that the MSU and McMaster do contribute to as well.
Thank you. Councillor Brenda Johnson, first time.
Actually, Councillor Farr asked the one question, because I also was an attendee back in the, I can't remember. But the question I asked was, why aren't we doing this on campus? And the response back was, no, they don't want us trashing there. So I'm just putting that out there. But I want to ask you a question about property standards. When I went to post-secondary school, it was with the understanding of my getting the training or my getting the knowledge of becoming responsible citizens, as we do with high school and as you do even up to kindergarten. So when you're looking at property standards, you're looking at the care of the place, in fact, where you live. Does that not give you that training ground for when you do get out onto your own properties, you do rent from someone else, not as a student, but so I guess what it comes down to is there's a bubble that's been created. When you get out of that bubble, do you then start taking care of the properties? Do you then start taking care of everything on an everyday basis, not just because we had a big bash on Friday night.
Right. So I do fundamentally believe that most students do take care of their properties.
I do too.
Being one of those students myself. And so for those few, I think that this does act as a learning experience, but the responsibility is on all of us, the city, the McMaster Students Union, and McMaster University, to ensure that we're cultivating renters who will be successful renters in the future. The reality of our generation is that many of us are never going to be homeowners. And so we want to make sure that people are renters who know their rights and who care for their properties, and we don't believe a punitive approach cultivates that effectively.
Thank you, and thank you for that very good answer. That wasn't to suggest that every single student out there is the one that's crossing the line, but I think we can both agree that there are a select few that are ruining it for the rest.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for the select few, and I think every one of us have neighborhoods in our communities who have renters. We have good renters, we have not so good renters. And the community is constantly coming into our offices saying, you need to do something about this property. And they will cite all different infractions and what effect it has on their property, not to mention property values and the debris that's now scattered into their property. They're now starting to clean up after their neighbors. So it is sort of a bit of a rat's nest, if you will, no pun intended, because that was another complaint. But it is a bit of a rat's nest, so how do we treat everybody across the city equally? Because we're all responsible for our own actions. So what message would you like us to give the rest of the city when we say, okay, but don't touch this neighborhood, but make sure the rest of the neighborhoods are up to standards?
So I think the issue is that we're seeing increased bylaw enforcement within the McMaster area. This isn't, like, the proactive approach isn't across the city. There are bylaw infractions on my street in Ward 6, and when we see grass too long, we cut it ourselves. If our neighbor is away, we shovel their snow. Yeah. And I think with this bylaw enforcement, this program, with the proactive approach to send bylaw officers around, or these students around, to parole the neighborhood and see if someone's grass is too long or if their boxes are in the wrong place, I don't think that is teaching students about their rights. It is, but in a punitive way. You're punishing them for doing it for the first time. And we're seeing increased punishment in this area that we're not seeing in other areas of Hamilton. We have of course we have bylaw officers, and I do understand my mom gets mad when the neighbor behind us has junk in their backyard, and if we do, we may call the city, but, and I think it is important to have bylaw enforcement, but I don't think the paroling and the proactiveness of this is fair, and it is not being done in the rest of the city.
And thank you for that answer. And if you want to use comparisons, Ward 11 does have a specialized bylaw officer that we have commissioned to go through Ward 11 specifically. So you're not just the only ones that we've recognized that there's an issue, and that we have hired people to go in there and proactively go in and stop illegal businesses and property standards and all that. So just to let you know, you're not the only ones that have been put into a motion to make sure that that neighborhood stays up to par. So thank you very much for your questions and answers. They were well done.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Aidan Johnson, second time.
Thank you. Just a quick information point, Madam Chair. Councillor Partridge asked a question about non-students, and what I can report is this. During my campaign, when I ran to be Ward 1 councillor, I knocked on every door in the ward, and one thing I learned is that there are a large number of low-income non-students who are living in Westdale and Ainsleywood, and there's significant anecdotal evidence suggesting that the number is growing. Lower-income non-students are increasingly moving into Ainsleywood, particularly because the rental opportunities are there and cheap. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. With that, then, we have no further questions of the presenters. May I have a motion to receive? Both presenters, moved by Councillor Green, second by Councillor Aidan Johnson. All in favour? Thank you. And I'm going to come back now, back into committee. Thank you, everyone. Questions of staff? Councillor Green, I have first, and Councillor Partridge so far.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you to anybody who would like to maybe answer this question, because I'm not clear. Has there been a follow-up staff report prepared?
Is
Through the chair to the councillor, on September 26th, an information update was sent to the mayor and member council, updating on the effectiveness of this pilot project from January 1st to August 31st.
I apologize. Did I miss it in today's package? Like it wasn't included as an appendix to this motion?
No, I believe it was sent out via email.
Okay, so perhaps you can speak to this on those points, because I do apologize, I missed that email. What if you could give maybe an overview of that report for the general benefit of the public? You've heard today the MSU has not received this. It hasn't been presented in any of the committees, so I'm assuming it hasn't been made public?
It's an information update. The pilot is still running, so we would coming back with a full report at the end that would be made more public. What we reported on in this report was that we began the program by inviting members of the AWWCA, and the MSU peer-to-peer coordinators to a meeting to discuss this pilot project and the expanded enforcement that was coming. We discussed the need to get some communication out. We drafted a communication, everybody reviewed, had input, and their comments were incorporated. This communication was sent out through the chairs of those two community groups. It was sent out through the councillor's office, and it was sent to McMaster University to send out through their social media. So that went out first. From there, we had a senior officer attend and train McMaster's peer-to-peer volunteers on the bylaws, the bylaw violations, and what is needed for compliance.
I'm sorry, if I could, these are volunteers?
Peer-to-peer McMaster volunteers that have a community outreach.
Oh, sorry.
But our officer attended and did a presentation to inform them of what would be coming and the bylaws that they needed to be aware of. Our student officers started, they did their training for a full month with an officer, and from there they hit the pavement going up and down the streets. They attended 34 streets and visited approximately 1,100 homes, knocking on doors, talking to property owners and tenants about what the program was about, their role, bylaw violations, and what was needed to be done. They handed out Bylaw 101 pamphlets as well. We also attended the student fair. We set up a booth and we had officers attending to engage the students and talk about the various bylaws that are more relevant for the McMaster University neighborhood.
Could I ask a question in that? How many student officers do you have in the outreach program?
We have in our Mohawk, or our McMaster, our Mohawk College program, we have 2 that are with Animal Services. We have 2 specific to McMaster University, and we have 2 that are patrolled through the rest of the city of Hamilton.
So on that point, 2 students to do outreach to 40,000 McMaster students in the community?
2 students, yes.
Okay. And I raised those points, Madam Chair, because it's clear that I didn't read the email or I didn't get the memo. I'm sure that that's a way that communication goes out. I normally get them in staff reports, but information report, I understand that. So there's been 2 students. What is their wage? Like, is there any concern around our own collective agreements as it relates to staffing? Is this like a temporary contract position? Is there a prevailing fair wage policy that's included in this?
Through the chair to the councillor, when we began the pilot, that's the first thing we did is we checked with labor relations on if we were permitted to go forward with this and make sure that we were above board and fair on all of this. Recently, I've double-checked with them when I saw the motion going forward that the program has actually wanted to be expanded by 2. Labor Relations has given me the green light. I sent them all the Mohawk College communications on this program, what it was about, and that we also have other co-op students in various sections within the city of Hamilton. The students are paid at a rate of $19 an hour.
Is that the prevailing wage for other bylaw enforcement?
No, it's actually 55% of a step 1 of the lowest grade of a bylaw officer.
So they're getting paid half of what our bylaw officers get?
Approximately, yes.
That's
Mohawk College has reported back to me when I questioned the wage that we were paying that their student, that we at the city of Hamilton are one of their highest paying for co-op students.
Respectfully, Madam Chair, relative precarity is not a standard that I ascribe to. So I have concerns that they're getting paid half of the fair prevailing wage of their counterparts. That's problematic and maybe cause for concerns from their behalf. But through you, how many fines have been levied?
We have issued 736 order to comply. We have a 75% compliance rate, which is huge.
So, I'm sorry, say that again?
We have 736 ordered complies were issued for various yard-related maintenance bylaws, and we have a 75% compliance rate, voluntary compliance rate.
And so what are the actual fines if they don't comply? And what's the, I heard $750.
We do not issue a ticket for yard maintenance-related bylaw violations unless it's snow on sidewalks. The fines are for non-compliant properties. They're fee for inspection charges. They're the charges that we apply standard throughout the city of Hamilton. And the work that these bylaw officers are doing is not the full scope of a bylaw officer. It's a small portion of the work they do. It's only yard maintenance-related bylaws. So you're talking about long grass and weeds, garbage and debris, snow on sidewalks. Those are the bylaws they focus on. We would not be able to have our students do exactly what a bylaw officers do, having approximately 50 bylaws in the city of Hamilton.
So we've heard here today that there's a bit of a gap, I think, in MSU's position and where the councilor's at. We've heard that they're willing to pursue this and provide legal support for people. What is the cost, our legal cost per Property Standards Committee enforcement?
The yard maintenance bylaw does not go through an appeal process, only property standards.
Okay. So there's no legal costs if they decide to appeal this? There's no avenues for appeal on this?
And they can request to have their fees for service reviewed.
And who would review that?
Senior staff.
And there's no review or oversight after that?
And once they make their decision, they've made their decision.
Okay.
They
That's good.
review all the officers' notes, the pictures, the evidence that's been taken at the time of the investigations.
Okay, that helps because I was unclear about the chain of appeal. So that helps. Thank you.
Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And just a couple of questions. So thank you for the answers to the previous questions, but I'm going to just ask you to unpack it a little bit more because it's not clear to me. So if we had 736 orders to comply, is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. And we had a 75% rate of compliance with that, right?
Correct.
Okay. But there's no fees charged
Yes, there's fees charged for noncompliance.
for orders to comply?
Yes. So 25% of the properties didn't comply with their orders. They would have been issued a fee for service.
So only the 25% would
Yes.
actually be issued the fees for service. Okay. So how can the fees and the fines cover the cost if there's only 25% that are getting charged? And a follow-up to that question is also, I thought I heard you say, Madam Chair, that there are fees that were forgiven. So of that 25%, I'm assuming that some of those fees would be forgiven. So how is it covering the costs?
So let me clarify. The fees for service, if there is a repeated violation within a one-year period, even though they may have complied, there was a violation at the time of the inspection, and that would be included.
But, so my question is still, how can the fees and the fines cover the costs? And are they, if only 25% are actually?
And they are covering. The fees for a first-time fee for service are $271, and then I believe it's about $160 for every subsequent violation after that.
So students are being charged $271?
The property owner is. It goes to the property taxes.
So it is the property owner?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And so the other question I have, Madam Chair, and perhaps this should be to Madam Clerk, the info report, if I understand it, was emailed around to councillors. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. But at some point in time, do these information reports, why didn't it come to GIC or be part of a committee package?
This was just to give an update on the status of the program. The full report will be coming out once the program is completed at the end of December, and we have all the information, and we've done our program evaluation.
So that will be at the end of December then?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the issue that I have with this motion is that we're being asked to support something in the absence of the full report that will have all the information coming forward, which I'm hearing is going to be December.
That is correct.
Okay, so, there's no account numbers, there's no financial information in here. We don't know what the costs are going to be. We don't know because the final report is due in December. And although I do understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that the information report did contain some information, we don't have that in front of us with this motion. And I find that just a little bit problematic. It would definitely have been helpful to the mover if we had had that report in front of us with this motion as it stands right now. So the report coming forward in December, what are you expecting that to include that would be more than what's in the information report?
Well, we've had a lot of, we've been out there issuing through the September move-in week. I would say that we will have, probably similar to what we have right now, a lot of orders issued, a high rate of compliance, and some fee-for-services charged. The student wages will be covered through the fee-for-service charges issued.
And so I think this probably is my final question, but the information report, and I do remember receiving it, but I got to be honest with you, I glanced through it as quickly as I could because of the hundreds of other emails that we all tend to get. But the information in that information report, was it January to June? Is that what was included in the time frame?
It was January to August 31st.
January to August 31st. Thank you. So that would have included move-out week when there's the most garbage around?
We always have a lot of garbage through April when they move out,
Right.
and September when they move in. Waste management is also involved at that time, issuing orders or notices for waste inappropriate at the curb.
Okay, so the answer is yes, then that would have been included in the figures. So, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I am having some difficulty with this because, as I say, in the absence of more information and the final report coming through in December, I would much rather wait until then before we dealt with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I had Councillor Aidan Johnson next. If you'd like to speak now, Aidan, and I have Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Councillor Partridge makes a good point, which is that it would be helpful to have the report in front of us. And I won't go into the story of how it all worked out, but I will say that she makes a good point. And I've just conferred with Councillor Brenda Johnson, who made me think that maybe my motion should be tabled until we have the report. I'm wondering about an energetic response to this idea. Yeah. Okay. So, Madam Chair, the fun will continue another day. I propose a tabling motion till, if staff could provide me with the date that the report will be available.
Probably the program goes to the end of the December. We can start working on the report. We have a lot of information already gathered. The issue is that the hiring for these co-op students begins now, waiting to December. Like last year, we were at committee in December as well, rushing it through because the students accept other placements. So the posting
Well, you know what? I'd forgotten that argument from staff, and now I'm remembering it, and it's actually changing my mind about the tabling motion. So I'm not going to offer a tabling motion. I would like to go ahead with the motion that's on the agenda to vote on. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. all of the questions I had for staff have already been asked, more or less. I suppose the one question I would throw in is for staff to just speak about this motion in terms of why it is that staff supports the motion and the program. Why?
We get a lot of complaints from the community when we're out there about the conditions. Yard maintenance is a small portion of the bylaw enforcement. What we do after our students being out there and doing their enforcement, they have reported back to me that they have seen a considerable improvement in the communities, and they have received very positive feedback, not only from the property owners that they have built relationships with out there, but also the occupants living in these homes. When an officer issues an order to comply for any property, they do not know whether or not there is a student living in that house or if it's a permanent resident of that property. So just in general, it's been very, very successful. Our summer student and our other student programs are also very successful programs.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, could you remind me, was our agenda amended such that the motion is now, I can present my motion? I think that's in order, but I'll go to you for advice on that.
Your motion is here to be presented, Councillor.
So great. So Councillor Farr had agreed to second the motion.
Okay, so you're going to put,
Yeah.
that's fine. Councillor Green had one more question of
Great.
staff, though, please, if I could
Sure,
maybe.
sorry.
Councillor Green?
So understanding that there's no recourse for any type of appeal, that this is a decision that's made by staff, senior level staff, unappealable, I do have a concern, Madam Chair, through you to legal. What is the human rights parameter around targeting identifiable groups for governing basic city bylaws? Is there anything within the parameter that might put us at risk of some kind of class action if we are crafting bylaw to target an identifiable group in our city?
Through you, Madam Chair, human rights law is not my typical practice area, but that's certainly something I can look into and have appropriate staff to follow up with you on.
Well, I would like to ask, and I don't know if it's appropriate, but within the context of this report that's coming back, I would like to get some kind of legal opinion around whether targeting students specifically for bylaws that are not being equally applied to all residents across the city might constitute an infraction from the Human Rights Code. And then I'll save my comments around that for once the motion is being put. Thank you.
So I'm going to put myself now on the speaker's list. Councillor Johnson, if you take the chair, please. Just following that question. So I just want to verify through to Ms. Barnett-Kelly. You stated earlier, and I want to be sure, when these students go out and do proactive enforcement, they're not targeting students. They're targeting properties. We don't know whether it's the owner that's causing the problem or it's because it's student housing, correct?
That is correct, Councillor.
I would just want to be sure for the record we're aware of that, because they
Yep,
do
no
not
way.
go in saying, okay, it looks like it's a student house, bang, we're going to target it. They have no idea. Thank you very much for that. And I want to ask a second question, if I could, is, and just going back, the good Councillor Ward 1's asking for 2 more. Do we find that the existing co-op students that we have now have just been inundated? I mean, I'm getting a sense that things have been getting better, so are we giving an indication that we still haven't got enough enforcement out there?
We're still very, very busy, and we're also weather-driven. So, for instance, if we get a lot of snow, which we didn't have in January of this year, we would need a lot more enforcement out there. So, yes, we are busy enough to expand the program and even keep our summer students program going.
Okay, I just wanted to verify that. Thank you very much. And I'll take the chair back, but who tinkled again? Councillor Partridge?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And you just raised another question in my mind. So what we're still going to have the 2 existing students. What this motion is asking for is 2 additional students, so there would be 4. Is that correct?
And that is correct, leaving 2 other students for the remainder of the city of Hamilton.
Okay, so there's still going to be the 2 students, so nothing has changed in terms of the number of students. And as the previous speaker said, Madam Chair, that the situation is actually getting better. I mean, none of us can predict what the weather's going to be at any time of year. But it doesn't mean we will run out and hire staff just in case. So we're not losing 2. We're still going to have that 2. We're still going to have the existing 1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now, Councillor Aidan Johnson, come back to you on your motion.
Thanks very much. And Councillor Farr has agreed to second A, that the pilot program using Mohawk College co-op students for enforcement of yard maintenance and related bylaws be made permanent in communities around McMaster University, and B, that 2 additional Mohawk College co-op students be hired for enforcement of yard maintenance related bylaws for McMaster neighborhood at full cost recovery from the inspection fees. And all of my arguments have been presented, and I'd like to thank my council colleagues for their consideration of this motion, which comes in the context of what we've clearly heard today to be a very complex web of issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion's on the floor. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, and I think I've expressed some of my reservations around this motion, the way that it's been presented. I'd like to introduce actually a thesis that was done on bylaw here in our city called Governing Incivility, which is an ethnographic account of municipal law enforcement, urban renewal, and neighborhood conflict in the city of Hamilton. Extensive hours of ride-along program from an academic who highlighted the way in which the city proactively works in neighborhoods to be able to work through some of these complex issues of neighborhood conflict. And I think worth noting for all those involved, both present here around this table, but also from the MSU. And what I'm left with is still the feeling that this over-policing and under-servicing of our students is contrary to everything we say around wanting to retain and attract the best and the brightest, and wanting to use an asset-based approach to neighborhood development. I feel it is punitive, and I feel that it is at $261 applied to students in an unfair way. And I think what we're going to find, Madam Chair, is we will, in pitting students against students, end up having students being pitted against the city of Hamilton in a way that is not congruent with everything we've said around wanting to retain and attract these students. I know in my time at Acadia, I was the defense counsel for the Senate, so when someone was caught doing things that were inappropriate, I would often offer them advice, and the advice that I would give them is that we had an appeals process in Nova Scotia, was that they take whatever they can from this process and appeal it at the next level and claim hardship and their inability to pay these types of fees. And it seems to me that left without any recourse for appeal, left with incomplete information from the Residential Tenancies Act, what we're forcing the MSU to do is essentially create an adversarial approach to informing the students on how to interact with the landlords. And I do have to raise the point. We have allowed for the expansion of inappropriate density in Westdale. We have allowed for illegal landlords to create rooming houses to provide accommodations for students that are often paying $600, $700 a room without proper building code and without proper fire code and without proper oversight. That is not the fault of the students. The students are not the problem. Poor policy is the problem. Poor planning is the problem. Poor regulation and oversight of landlords is the problem. And what we've done when we talk about the hygiene of a community in a very specific way is stigmatize students when all the reports suggest that even when they do congregate, reminded that the legal age of drinking has, and students are entering into university younger, is just not the same animal house culture that they had in the 70s, 80s, and apparently the 90s. Certainly when I was there in 2004, I thought it was kind of lame in terms of how the McMaster University, their party culture compared to other places like Bishop's, Laval, and all these other places where they're literally burning couches in the street and toppling cars. So if we want to talk about relative town and gown relationships, I think McMaster does a great job. But I think what this does is stigmatize the population and create a targeted approach to enforcement that, quite frankly, when I have some of the situations that I have in my neighborhood with gang houses, in some situations, drug houses, flop houses, and others, I would love to have extra resources to be able to, proactively go out there and shut these places down with high criminality and major social pressure in my neighborhood, which is why I think we referred this to the budget conversation the last time, because this is, I think, a undue simplified approach to creating a proactive relationship with the students. So I won't be supporting this. I won't be supporting this because I think there are better, more appropriate avenues to engage with students and the leadership that's there. I won't be supporting this because I do believe, with authenticity, in the value that they bring. I'm curious now, Madam Chair, to know if they were to form a ratepayers association, what would their economic impact look in our property tax assessment with 10,000 students? What are they paying at 2.7% mill rate for their per square foot a unit? It's a very interesting question. And when they start flexing their economic, value in the city, I think we'll see maybe a different situation, because all these houses, all the residents, the long-time residents that have been there forever, have received a tremendous amount of speculative equity in their properties just by the fact they could be student rentals. Incredible amount, disproportionate. And I would love to see what the impact is in terms of the trends of the value of Ainsleewood and Dalewood for the families that bought there in the 80s and 90s perhaps, and now are sitting on $750,000 just because it's possible their properties could be rentals. So it's tough on one hand to get all the economic benefits and uplift and enforced appreciation of equity, and then on the other hand say we don't want them here. And then on the third hand, when we do have appropriate density projects along corridors, turn it down because they don't want density. They don't want to have multi-level residential student housing, form-built student housing there. So seems super complex, and I think this is oversimplified. So I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Johnson, and I have myself on the list.
Yep, thank you. From what I understand through the conversations and the questions asked to staff, that of the 100% of those who were given orders, 75% were compliant at the end of the day. No fees were charged. It's the 25% that are still in non-compliance. I'm looking at it this way, that if we eliminate the resources in this community right now, the 25% doesn't go away. So where do we get the resources to deal with the 25%? And that's just what we have on the docket today. That doesn't mean tomorrow it could change. It could be even more. So therefore, now we have bylaw officers coming from all over the city to target areas because it's by complaint only. So my concern is if we eliminate this or we don't beef it up, then it's the 25% carries on as normal. They're the ones that are actually getting charged. I don't believe for a second that it's let's go after the students. I think it's let's go after a community that's experiencing a lot of negative impacts on those who do not care for their properties. So what's the difference whether it's here, it's in Winona, it's in Beasley, or if it's in Waterdown? The concern would still be there. So I understand that this is 100% cost recovery, so that's why I have no issues whatsoever with this coming forward. I do reserve the right, though, in December, if we do find out that the report is revealing a lot more than what we've been told today, then I would like to have to reserve the point of bringing a motion forward to eliminating the two positions that we have asked for today. So, folks, seriously, if this was any other community in Stony Creek and Glanbrook and Dundas and Ancaster and in Flamborough, we would be doing the exact same thing. We've targeted a concern. We've gone after the concern. 25% are non-compliant. That will not go away until we get compliance out of 100%. And in any community, that would be hallelujah for all the property owners or those that just live in the area and rent would love to hear, especially those who take very good care of their properties. They're the ones that have to live amongst this. So I'm supportive of this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, and I have myself on the list, Councillor
Please go ahead.
Johnson. Thank you, and certainly appreciate all the former speakers. And without a doubt, I will support this because I have to remember that this is not targeting students. This is targeting property owners. And this is where we have to target. And they have to understand that. If the property owners are passing this charge on to the students, then that's another issue that has to be dealt with. But today we have to deal with property standards. It may not be a student house that is the problem. It could be, I hate to say, but an aging senior, and that happens a lot throughout all of our community that just aren't able to deal with the overwhelming, weather conditions we've had this year. I mean, I think my husband's told me he's cut the grass, if not twice a week, at least every single week this year, right through summer, right through August, which is unheard of because of the amount of rains and the weather we've had. So this is not targeting students, and I certainly appreciate what the ward councillor has to deal with. And, you know, I wish we could, you know, wave a magic wand and make people all understand that we all have rights and responsibilities. And, you know, this is unfortunately the way we have to deal with it is by providing more enforcement, then that's how we have to deal with it. And as was mentioned in the last previous speaker saying, it could be anywhere in this city, absolutely anywhere in this city, that this could be going on. So I would hope that if I had an issue in Ward 10 and had to deal with it, that my colleagues would be supportive of it. I have a Salt Fleet campus at Mohawk. I have to say, fortunately, I don't have a lot of student rental housing there because they're tradespeople more than anything, but there are some student rental houses. I don't target them as property standards because they're student houses. When bylaws sent, it's to the principal residents. So I will be supporting this today and certainly look forward to the report that's coming in December, and we can get, I did read the previous report, but a fulsome report at the end of the year to give us a good indication that this is the right way to go. Thank you. Take the chair back, yes?
I just wanted to respond to that. The motion, the text of the motion doesn't say Ainsleywood. It says McMaster neighborhood. So it's very clear in the wording of the motion, this is targeted towards McMaster students. Thank you.
Okay, so we can play on words, and I'm not going to do that. So we have a motion before us, moved by Councillor Aidan Johnson, second by Councillor Jason Farr. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. We have Councillor Partridge and Councillor Green opposed. That carries, okay? Thank you, everyone. We're going to move on. Okay, under presentations, we have none today. We have the discussion items. It's not 8.1 is the sign variance appeal, SV 16-020 for the property known as 442 Millen Road, Stony Creek. This was denied by the Director of Planning and Chief Planner and appealed by the owner. PED 17145, Ward 10, and it was deferred on September 19th, and I believe the